if you stand up, you might fall in. And as you can see, tallest one on the way. So just be aware, if you stand up, you might hit your head. I'm just dropping my colleague off at that boat up there, and then I'll be going back downstream. Please keep your hands and feet and everything else inside the boat.
Crocodile?
Yeah, the crocodile might be hungry. For the same reasons, really. We're going to come close to other boats, walls, tunnels, things like that. Please don't push away from any walls, as this makes my job slightly harder, well, a lot harder, as the steering in this boat is quite counterintuitive, so it might send my boat into a direction I don't want it to go. Unless, of course, I ask you to, then that will probably help me out. If anything should happen to me, please remain calm and let the boat come to a natural stop. Do I have any boatsmen in my boat today? Yeah, fab. So we've got someone who'll take over. If not, then behind the seat over here, there is a card with emergency numbers and procedures on it, which we've never had to use. We just have to tell you about it in case.
I want to use an outboard then.
Sorry?
I want to use an outboard. Oh, that officially jumped in, didn't it?
Nearly did.
It's quite a decent fish, that. Nearly
Yeah,
jumped in
we've
the
got
boat.
over 30 species of fish in the River Stour.
Yeah, it nearly jumped in the boat, didn't it?
It did.
Yeah.
So if I should fall into the river, please don't panic. Let the boat come to a natural stop, and I'll probably just get myself. But my name is Kaylee. So feel free to ask any questions. I'll do my best to answer them. If I don't know the answer, I will try and make something up believable.
Hello. Hi.
Hello.
Biggest one, so we get to call ourselves. Oh yeah, that is an eel. Yeah.
Yeah, we've got a Stour in Dorset
Yes. Yeah.
at home.
They well, as you would probably tell with Dorset, it's fast flowing.
It is.
So that's why they are called Stours. There's 5 of them. The opposite is an ooze. So like in Cambridge, the River
yeah.
Cam is an ooze, which means it's slow, as you can tell from the word ooze.
Who's this?
He's holding a little bird in his hand as well. So he was an Italian friar who travelled to Canterbury in 1224. And he led an order of monks or friars that we know as the Grey Friars.
Yeah.
Also known as the Franciscan monks. So he was the first order of that kind in England, as you know, he was the leader of them. Now, they were very poor, and the best way to have the best relationship with God was to own as little as possible. So they owned very little. They had their Bible from Italy. They obviously looked a little bit weary. So they were mistaken as vagabonds and troublemakers, and they were arrested. So the punishment was to be hung. So when they were led to a prison, so if you see Grey Friars in Canterbury today, they now wear brown, as this is now the cheapest colour of fabric that you can get. Whereas grey, hence their name, was the cheapest colour in the 1200s. Low bridge ahead. You guys should be fine. You are fairly low down. If you hear a splash, that's me in the water.
You're at limbo.
More like a squat. My limbo is probably needs improvement.
How long have you been doing this?
Nearly 2 years.
Right, okay, so you used to it by now.
Yes, yeah.
What, every day?
Can't go through there.
Well, not every single day, thank
No.
you.
No worries. Hello.
Not every single day, but maybe 5 days a week. Yeah. Yeah. Give me 1 second because I have to shout. Canterbury was the most popular pilgrimage town and in England, and the third most popular in Europe. So people from everywhere would come down to Canterbury, and if they were too poor to afford a hotel or an inn, they could stay for one free night at the Eastridge Hospital. So pilgrimage became popular after the death of Thomas Becket, who was the Archbishop of Canterbury, appointed by King Henry II. So once upon a time they were friends, but what King Henry II did not anticipate was that his friend Thomas Becket was more religious than he had thought. So he didn't just get his way with the church. This meant that they disagreed, which eventually led to the murder of Thomas Becket. So he actually sent his knights to arrest Becket. However, the Archbishop Becket fought back and punched one of the knights in the face. For it, he paid the price. He got his head sliced open and his brains spread across the cathedral, which was a pretty gruesome way to go. Now, after this happened, everything in King Henry II's life was going wrong, and apparently he walked along the King's Mile, which you can go to here in Canterbury, naked and being whipped, and went to the martyrdom in the cathedral, which is where the Archbishop was buried, and he prayed for 3 solid days. And after that, he also gifted this building that we're now underneath, the King's Mill, to his sister, to the Archbishop's sister, as an apology. You know, I'm really sorry we killed your brother. Here's a mill for you.
As you do.
1 second. Ahoy!
Gosh, Thomas Becket, James Stour.
It's an impressive spider website.
Yeah, so we have a species of spider under here that was thought to be extinct. And then they found them here in Canterbury and in Exeter as well. So they have a very exotic name. They're called a cave spider. Where is she going?
Drop down, you go.
Yeah. Bonkers.
Left in.
Yeah, we're not allowed to clean those webs away now,
No,
just
no.
because of that.
So do you see the spiders?
Yeah, sometimes we do.
What, the
We
big ones?
sometimes they're not too big. They're mostly small. There's a wooden chair just up here.
Oh,
We'll
yeah.
see it again on the way back down. But I'll tell you about it now. So, does anybody know what this is called?
So dunking.
What's that, sorry?
As a form of public punishment. So it was a very shameful thing to have done to you. So if you believed that your tenant hadn't paid their rent on time, your husband snored too loud, your wife nagged too much, or there was something you just didn't like, maybe, you could pay the council a tuppence and get them dumped in the river in front of everybody. So it was a very public event.
How much is it now?
A tuppence. No, well, you would be lucky to have it done now, because in those days the river was an open sewer.
Ooh.
So by dunking your snoring husband, nagging wife, etc., you'd be teaching them a very good lesson to keep their mouth shut. If you have a look over there to my left, there's a hole in the wall, so that is called a privy hole, so a form of plumbing where toilet water would come straight out into the river. Nowadays we are quite lucky to have the cleanest river in the southeast. Yes. So those privy holes are now not completely redundant, they are now homes to mini pigeons. So the embarrassment of being dunked in the river on the ducking stool would continue. So the next few weeks people would certainly smell you before they could see you. The bathing habits were not quite as they are today. So if you were dunked in the river, not only would you have the embarrassment of being dunked in front of everybody, but for the next few weeks you would walk around looking and smelling like poo as well. It's only flooded once in the 1960s, so we've got some gates at the end that act for, you know, flood control.
Yeah.
I'll show you the gates when we get down there. But right now we've got the Marlowe Theatre, which is here on my left, named after Christopher Marlowe, who was is a famous playwright. Now a lot of people haven't really heard of him so much anymore, because when you go into the spying profession, it's one that you tend to take to the grave. You don't go there just for a summer internship. He knew too much to stay alive, therefore the only way to get rid of the problem was to get rid of the problem, which was Marlowe. So that's the first theory. The second one, which is also with a black hood almost. Now black was the second most expensive colour that you could get in the 1200s. It was the medieval version of wearing a Rolex watch or driving around a Ferrari. And the reason why it was so expensive was because it took a lot of dye to get something a true black colour, and a long dyeing process as well. So by wearing black, it was definitely a symbol of wealth, kind of letting people know we're rich and powerful, don't mess with me. And it certainly worked, as people were quite afraid of them, not just because of their money, but because of what they were doing and what they were known for. So they followed the teachings of St. Dominic of Spain, which linked them in with something called the Spanish Inquisition. So if they believed somebody was a heretic, so somebody who does not believe in God or commits a crime against God, they could arrest them and torture them and burn them at the stake. So people did fear them quite a bit. So the way that they made their money, they earned small profit to receive land, money, silver and gold. We can't help but think this may be people trying to pardon themselves of crimes, or maybe just being put on the nice list. Yeah, no probs. So when they arrived in Canterbury in 1221, they stood before the king, King Henry III, who was quite a young king at the time, and lectured him for 5 hours. And for that, or with that, they were awarded £500, and the king turned a blind eye to what they were doing. So the money that they got given by the king went towards building this building over here, their priory. This was the Blackfriars Priory, and the building opposite was their guest house. The reason why the guest house was separated was because it was a crime to disturb a monk in prayer. So they had 11 buildings in total, and these are the last 2 that remain alongside Solly's Orchard. They also had their own mill, so just from that you can tell they were very apparent figures here in Canterbury. Nowadays you may be wondering what the sculptures are all about. They are part of a school. So the King's School, now own these 2 buildings that used to belong to the Blackfriars. The sculptures are part of their art department. The guest house is now their music department. So they claim to be the oldest school in the world. So it's quite a prestigious school. Now I'm not so sure about that, because I don't know what Aristotle or Socrates would say about that being the oldest school in the world. But we do have evidence of King Henry VIII sending 30 poor boys to the King's School. But they were notably poor because in those days, rich boys were obviously already born smart. They didn't need an education. Girls were not entitled to one either. So very different these days. So for the past 30 years, they've accepted girls at the King's School, which is great. However, the Crown will no longer pay for your education. It is a tribute to Christopher Marlowe, who wrote the play Dr. Faustus. And in that play, there was a famous line that said, "Is this the face that launched 1,000 ships?" which was about Helen of Troy. So the artist has brought it to life, the line to life, made Canterbury's very own Helen of Troy using 1,000 pieces of ship, which is quite a nice idea. I've not counted them myself, but the bridge we're about to go underneath now is a really nice echo. So if I have any singers or poets on my boat, I would be very appreciative if you would show off your talent.
It's sat there, isn't it?
Need speed to get you through. Pull this one. Quick.
Already been splattered.
Thanks, Katie.
No worries.
On his way back, yeah.
But that's what they say. So as you look at the building, you would expect it to be Tudor. And it was built in the Tudor period. It was built in 1500 AD. However, the black and white that you see is not authentically Tudor, so it was updated and the walls will not be a true white. There'd be a browny off-white colour. I'm not sure what it is they made it with. I know it's not cement, but they used to mix ox blood with it, which made it that reddy pinky colour. We're underneath the High Street now, which is the King's Bridge. Now, people say that some of this bridge will date all the way back to Roman time. I think it's that archway that we just went underneath. So if you have a look at a lot of Roman sort of structure and architecture, it's very, they do the arches quite a lot. I'll talk to you about the Old Weavers though, so not just a name of the restaurant, but also they were people. They were French and Belgian Huguenots. So they were Protestants that were fleeing France and Belgium after Catholic persecution, and they came to Canterbury. We are fairly close to France, after all. It's actually quicker to go to France than it is to go somewhere like, I don't know, Northampton even, so. Yeah, so they fled to Canterbury and they set up a weaving factory, which is why it's called the Old Weaver's House. But this came at a really good time for Canterbury because it was about 30 years after King Henry VIII had banned pilgrimage. So pilgrimage, as it was so popular, it was our main source of income. So banning it was like banning tourism, pubs or students in Canterbury now. Our economy really did suffer for about 30 years until these weavers came, and they managed to, revive it a little bit by setting up the weaving factory and employing 30% of the population. And it was quite successful, so they started making simple woolen cloth, and eventually they were making silk. Give me 1 second. Ahoy! So once they had left England, apparently the industry had died because there was no longer anybody to teach the ways of weaving as they did. So, the garments and the structures were not as strong as they were with the French and Belgian influence. Does anybody here follow British politics?
Trying not to at the moment.
I'm glad you're laughing, it is a joke. No, but basically I just find it really ironic. So if your surname ends in an E and you're British, you're most likely a descendant of these French and Belgian Huguenots that had fled to Canterbury as refugees, such as Nigel Farage. A little bit ironic. So the river has always provided Canterbury with really good economic resource. And just resources in general. So the city was built around the river, it was here first. So we've had, today we use it in tourism, fishing, it's been used for fabric, such as the weavers. We also had an old tannery. We don't get to see the tannery, unfortunately, as that was upstream. Also, it's now closed. In 1942, we lost about a quarter of the buildings in our city. It was part of a wider Nazi operation to dampen our spirit, reduce our morale, by targeting towns of cultural and religious importance, specifically towns with famous architecture, such as our cathedral. However, our cathedral still stands. And this was solely due to the fact that we had fire watchmen, that's what they were called, fire watchmen. They were volunteers, men and women, and what they would do is some would stand at the top of the cathedral so they could see the whole city, and they could also see when planes were coming, when to drop bombs. And what they would do is call out and warn the people below where the bombs were going when they were coming. So they had a bit of a forewarning for these fire watchmen who would scoop the bombs up and throw them into the garden, as the bombs being used were fire bombs, so tubes of burning thermite that had about 20 to 30 seconds before they actually detonated once they had dropped. And that saved